I thought my subscribers had given me the easiest challenge I'd ever filmed. Spend one night alone in the most haunted forest in Appalachia. No haunted dolls, no abandoned hospitals. Just me, a lantern, and miles of empty woods. That's it. Then my phone rang. If you're ever hiking through Blackwater Falls State Park after sunset and your phone rings from your own number, don't answer it. I did. The voice only whispered 4 words. Don't go to the house. When I looked up from my phone, someone was standing in the middle of the trail watching me. By sunrise, search and rescue teams were combing miles of Appalachian forest looking for a man who believed he'd only been gone one night. Hello everyone, and welcome back. If you're new here, I'm glad you found us. This is where we explore stories that blur the line between Appalachian folklore, unexplained disappearances, and supernatural horror. If you've been here before, thank you for coming back. Turn down the lights, get comfortable, and remember that tonight's story contains unsettling themes involving isolation, missing persons, and psychological terror. Some stories lose their grip on you after enough time passes. This wasn't one of them. I've replayed every decision from that night more times than I can count, trying to figure out where I crossed the line between reality and something I still can't explain. Even now, I'm not sure whether what happened in those mountains belonged to old folklore, or whether the folklore existed because people like me never came back to tell the truth. This happened in West Virginia, deep inside the Appalachian Mountains, where some trails have histories older than the maps that mark them. People around here pass down certain warnings, the same way they pass down family recipes. Quietly, usually only after someone disappears. Most outsiders laugh when they hear those stories. I used to laugh too. At the center of this story is a man named Derek Brown. If you had asked anyone who knew me before last October, they would have described me as practical, skeptical, and maybe just stubborn enough to chase scary stories for a living. During the week, I worked construction. On weekends, I filmed paranormal investigations for my subscribers, most of which ended with nothing more mysterious than broken buildings, restless wildlife, or overactive imaginations. I didn't believe in haunted forests. I believed in bad lighting, bad weather, and people convincing themselves they'd seen something impossible. Before leaving for West Virginia, my older sister asked me one question that didn't make any sense. If someone calls from your own phone, promise me you won't answer. I laughed and asked where she'd heard something that ridiculous. She didn't smile. Instead, she told me our grandfather disappeared somewhere in those same mountains decades earlier after claiming he kept receiving impossible phone calls. No trace of him was ever found. I still packed my gear, camera, tent, extra batteries, an old lantern, and a revolver I hoped would spend the entire trip untouched. The plan sounded simple. Spend one night alone inside what locals called the most haunted stretch of Appalachia. Before hiking into Blackwater Falls State Park, I planned to stop near the historic Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum, document the area's reputation, and spend the night deep in the forest where so many local legends seemed to overlap. Some people encouraged the investigation. Others looked uncomfortable the moment I mentioned visiting both places in the same trip. One older volunteer quietly told me those mountains had a habit of borrowing faces from the people who wandered too far into them. I thanked him for the story and kept walking. At first, Everything unfolded exactly the way I'd expected. The hike was quiet. The rain never stopped. The trail stretched endlessly between towering trees. Nothing happened until my phone rang. There was no signal, no service, yet my screen displayed only one name: Derek Brown. That single phone call would lead me to an abandoned cabin, a locked room, my grandfather's final journal, and a question I'm still not sure I survived long enough to answer. But to understand how any of that became possible, we have to go back to the afternoon I first stepped onto the trail at Blackwater Falls State Park. The trail narrowed with every step, swallowed by towering oaks and black spruce that seemed to lean closer the deeper I went. Rain dripped steadily from the branches, tapping against my hood and the metal top of the lantern. I checked my phone more out of habit than hope. Still no signal. I tried to convince myself the impossible phone call had been some bizarre glitch, a corrupted app, a prank, anything except what my gut kept insisting. The sun disappeared long before I expected it to. One moment, the woods were gray. The next, they were almost completely black. I found a small clearing just off the trail and stopped. That's when I saw the cabin. It sat among the trees as though the forest had slowly grown around it over the decades. The log walls were warped with age. Moss covered most of the roof, and part of the chimney had collapsed into a pile of broken stone. It should have been abandoned. Yet a single oil lantern burned on the front porch, casting warm golden light across the rain-soaked steps. I called out, "Hello?" Only the rain answered. I stepped closer, my boots sinking into wet earth. Through the dusty front window, I could just make out an old wooden rocking chair. It moved, slowly, back, forward, back, forward. No one was sitting in it. A cold shiver crawled across my shoulders. The rational part of me searched for explanations. Wind, uneven floorboards, old houses did strange things. Still, I decided against sleeping inside. Instead, I pitched my tent about 30 yards from the porch where I could keep the cabin in sight. My camera faced the front door while I heated a small meal over a camping stove. The rain eased, leaving behind a silence so complete it felt unnatural. No crickets, no owls, not even the sound of distant water, just silence. Sometime after midnight, heavy footsteps crunched through the leaves outside my tent. One step, another. Another. They circled me with deliberate patience. I grabbed the lantern and unzipped the tent. Nothing. The muddy ground reflected the lantern's glow. No footprints. Then I heard breathing. Slow, deep, close enough that I should have felt it against my face. I swung the lantern toward the trees. A towering, pale figure stood between two trunks at the edge of the trail. Its arms hung unnaturally long at its sides. It didn't blink. It didn't move. The lantern flickered. For less than a second, darkness swallowed everything. When the flame steadied again, the figure was gone. Then came 3 deliberate knocks. Knock, knock, knock. Not on my tent, on the cabin door. Against every instinct, I walked toward the porch. The front door creaked open with little resistance. Dust coated every surface inside except for a narrow strip across the wooden floor, as though someone had passed through recently. Old family photographs lined the walls. their faces faded beyond recognition. Upstairs, every bedroom door stood open. Every door except one. It was locked. As I reached the top step, an old black rotary telephone sitting on a hallway table suddenly rang. The line wasn't connected. I stared at it until the ringing became impossible to ignore. Finally, I lifted the receiver. Static hissed into my ear. Then I heard my own voice, terrified, barely whispering. "Derek, don't let it see you looking back." The line went dead. A heartbeat later, the locked door trembled. Once, twice, then something on the other side answered with 3 slow knocks. The knocking stopped. Silence settled over the hallway so completely that I could hear rain dripping through the damaged roof somewhere below. I wrapped both hands around the lantern and stepped toward the locked door. If someone was trapped inside, I couldn't just walk away. If it was an animal, I'd scare it off. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. The old wood groaned beneath my shoulder. Once, twice. On the third hit, the rusted latch snapped and the door swung inward. Nothing rushed out. The room smelled of mildew and old paper. Dust floated through the lantern light, undisturbed for years. Shelves lined the walls, stacked with weathered journals, cardboard boxes, and bundles of yellow documents tied together with faded string. No furniture. No windows, no sign of whoever had been knocking. The only sound was my own breathing. I set the lantern on a crate and opened the nearest box. Inside were dozens of missing person reports from towns scattered across West Virginia. Most dated back 40 or 50 years. Many included handwritten notes clipped to the originals. Last seen entering Blackwater Falls. Witness reported hearing familiar voices.
Search suspended. No remains recovered. Another box contained brittle folders stamped with the seal of the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum. Patient files. Several had been marked transferred before the hospital closed sections of the facility decades ago. As I skimmed through them, the same description appeared again and again. Patients claimed a tall, pale figure followed them through the forest without making a sound. It never attacked. It simply watched. Days later, family members insisted the person who returned home wasn't the same. One report ended with a sentence that made my stomach tighten. The subject believes the watcher does not kill its victims. It replaces them. A leather-bound journal rested alone on the highest shelf. Its cover was cracked with age. The name pressed into the front nearly stopped my heart. Thomas Brown, my grandfather. Hands trembling, I turned the pages. He described impossible phone calls, trails that looped back on themselves, voices borrowing the sounds of loved ones. Every detail mirrored what I'd experienced since entering the forest. The final entries were hurried, the handwriting jagged. The cabin isn't a refuge, it's a cage. We built it to imprison whatever walks these woods. Someone opened the room before me. I tried to seal it again. I failed. The last page held only one unfinished sentence. If my family ever finds this, nothing else. A cold breeze drifted through the broken doorway. I looked toward the window overlooking the clearing. The towering, pale figure stood only a few yards from the porch, perfectly still beneath the rain. Then movement caught my eye. Another figure stepped out from behind a tree. My height, my jacket, my backpack. Even the lantern hanging from its hand matched mine. It wore my face. The copy smiled as though we'd been expecting each other. Then, in my own voice, it spoke. You shouldn't have opened the door. The smile never left its face. I stumbled backward out of the room, nearly dropping the lantern. My double didn't follow. It simply stood in the rain beside the towering pale figure, both of them watching as though the next move belonged to me. I ran. Down the stairs, across the porch, into the trees. Within minutes, I realized something was terribly wrong. The trail I'd entered from was gone. Every narrow path twisted through the forest before delivering me back to the same clearing, the same cabin, the same porch, no matter which direction I chose. I tried marking trees with my knife. The marks vanished. I checked my watch. 1:47 a.m. 5 minutes later, it read 11:16 p.m. Then 3:2. Time no longer moved forward. It simply wandered. The lantern flickered. The flame died. Darkness swallowed everything. A second later, it burst back to life on its own. The cabin stood exactly where it always had. My double waited beside the porch. When I lifted my left hand, it lifted its right. When I stepped sideways, it mirrored me perfectly. Only the towering figure never moved. It remained rooted between the trees, like a silent judge waiting for a decision that had already been made. My phone vibrated. Incoming call. Derek Brown. This time, I answered. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then my own voice came through, calm and exhausted. There is only one way out. Static crackled. One of you has to stay. The line went dead. The forest answered with whispers. They came from every direction. Derek, my grandfather's voice. I couldn't stop it. Then my sister. Don't leave me. The voices grew closer. Branches snapped behind me. Footsteps splashed through the mud. Finally, I heard myself. Wait! You're going the wrong way. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around. Instead, I shut my eyes and ran toward the cold morning air I could barely feel through the trees. Roots caught my boots. Branches tore at my jacket. The voices begged, cried, screamed. I never looked back. When sunlight finally broke through the canopy, I stumbled onto a familiar trail.